Hello and welcome to Eve's Apple Radio, the podcast where we talk about the things that we want to talk about. And today we're going to be talking about the messy and magical work of mental well-being and how Africanism, feminism, and healing intersects. And we're going to talk about reclaiming ourselves in both the political and the personal. Today, very excited to say that we are joined by Rosie Motene, who is author, actor, producer, activist, a certified life coach and counselor, and a fierce Pan-Africanist feminist. Rosie is known for speaking out on queer matters, on healing matters, and she penned memoirs reclaiming the soil. Welcome, Rosie, to Eve's Apple Radio.
Thank you, and congratulations for the new platform.
Thank you so much. So, as we are trying to get into a sort of tradition of, before we even start speaking about anything, start with speaking about things that have brought us joy or pleasure lately. So, what is the thing that has brought you joy or pleasure lately? Or
Um,
both?
Lots of things. The fact that I'm still breathing, and it's amazing that you asked this question because it was around about this time last year that I made a very difficult decision to close one of my businesses because I had to listen to my body. And so the fact that I'm breathing, the fact that I am healthier than what I was last year, brings me immense amount of joy. And then, of course, one of my biggest flexes last year when I turned 50 was that I'm 50 years old and I still have a mum alive to call me. And so that just brings so much joy and pleasure to me.
I love that. I love that. And also, we look forward to hear about the journey because, we take time and I suppose wellness as a given, and it genuinely isn't. And the fact that you have turned 50 is a big milestone. I don't know if you're a birthday person, but I do think that time is such a wonderful gift. And the fact that you also have your mom, that's also an additional gift. And so right there, I wanted to ask about just what are some of the biggest internal shifts and life moments that have brought you to today? I mean, you wear many hats: actress, producer, activist, healer. So, just as off the bat, what are some of the biggest life shifts or life moments that have brought you to this very point?
Actually understanding the impact of the work on what it has on our bodies.
Yeah.
Being in the activism space, I mean, it's over 20 years now. And as much as you learn about the intimidation, you learn about the resilience, you learn about looking after your bodies, for me, it has been an intentional act to say, okay, Rosie, are you really okay? Yes, you're strong. Yes, you're powerful. Yes, you're resilient. But are you really okay? And
Yeah.
so, and no fault of the feminist who I learned from when I started my journey, because resilience was what we strived on. But now that's become almost like a badge of honor. But it's a badge of honor that the patriarchy and the other forces are using to break us down. And so it's about really listening to where you're at, because the work, particularly the feminist space, particularly the queer space, the energies are abnormal. So it's not a day-to-day job or a normal work environment. We work with abnormal energies and abnormal spaces. And so the effects that it's going to have on our body are also abnormal.
Yeah.
And when you think that you're strong, but then your body tells you otherwise. But because resilience is told you got to keep on going, you keep on pushing, keep on pushing, keep on pushing. And so that is those are the life shifting moments that I found, and particularly during COVID, where that for me was also another eye opener, where Suddenly we were at home, and yes, I was freaked out because as a creative, as you know, there was no work coming in. But I learned to trust myself. I learned to trust the process. I was also very fortunate that I had an amazing, amazing girlfriend who was able to hold me during that space, and we were in it together, even when we got COVID. But it was
Mm,
also a time to reflect on, wait a minute, what were my past traumas that I'm still facing now, that I haven't processed, that I haven't released? And so that internal reflection was that, whoa, I've actually been carrying a lot. Yes, I've been
yeah.
strong. Yes, I've been doing this. Yes, I've been supporting and I've gotten support from other people. But this is affecting me on another level. So those are the two major ones that and it was actually during COVID where I ultimately went into and I did my refresher courses on counseling, life coaching, and everything else, and I started Letsatsi Healing Space.
Okay. And it's such an interesting thing that you bring up about that moment, which was almost like a forced pause, being the catalyzer on how have I been okay? Am I okay right now? What are the things that I've put on pause because of resilience? We must be resilient almost always. And I'm just curious about because you said that you then got onto your refresher course and started Lizati. What are the things that you have picked up around you, people around you in your community, that otherwise had wouldn't have stuck out so much had you not had that 2 year pause? Well, had we all not had that 2 year pause?
Yeah. The most obvious one is that a lot of us have forgotten how to breathe, and that is what
You
even
know,
pushed
if you're
me.
going to sub me, like if you're going to come for me, I'm gonna need you to, I need you to come to me direct because that is so true. That is so true.
And what's so crazy is that I'm a qualified and certified breathwork practitioner. And the
Yes.
course that I did, I should have done over 3 months. It took
Yeah.
me a year because I was refusing to acknowledge some of the tasks, some of the theory, because it applied to me. And I was like, okay, why am I so scared to breathe? Why am I so? And I realized that as much as I thought I was really in my body and as much as I can and being present, I wasn't being present enough for myself. And that also
Oh.
comes with a lot of self reflection. It also comes with a lot of forgiveness for yourself. And
Yes.
so, as much as I loved doing the breathwork course, it was also emotionally taxing on me. And I thought,
Yeah.
okay, if I'm going to do this, I need to do this properly. So I kept on going back and going back, and finally qualified. And then, all right, yes, now I'm ready to pass on the knowledge. But the most important thing, and within our system, is that we've forgotten how to breathe. There's so
I'm
much
just
hate around, there's so much that we're all doing. There's so much pain, and now especially where the world is with what's happening with the impact of the Trump presidency. And I don't want to bring
yes.
him into our conversation, but unfortunately, his work and his idiocracy, for want of a better word, has affected so many spaces. And yes, we need the shift and we need to operate in ourselves, but also now the world is waking up, and I was part of that world, waking up that America isn't the greatest. America
Yeah.
isn't, things aren't bigger and better in America. We're seeing a lot of things are a lot more dumber and a lot more scarier.
Heck,
Um,
the PR machinery is very strong there.
yeah,
Now it's come undone.
yeah.
Back to the breathing, as you said it, I literally had to remind breathe. I literally had to remind myself to breathe. And then a lot of the times you assume that you are because it's the most natural thing. And if
Mm,
something as basic as that is something that is lost to us, um, and we have to relearn it, it really is a show for exactly how necessary the work that you've started and the work that you continue to do is important. And I'm just
mm.
curious about then how does that showing up? Because, we get taught a lot of things like a lot of things are American, a lot of things are Eastern. And when you talk about breath work, immediately people think, oh, it's probably just yoga and this and that. And there's no African reference to what it feels like, what it looks like to be in one's body. Yeah.
Such a powerful, powerful statement. And so looking at the perception of what breath is, it's also the perception of what healing and looking out after ourselves and how commercialized it's become. So people
Yes.
think a wellness day is going to a spa and all of that, and that's great. But that costs a lot of money. A lot of us don't have that luxury. And so when you look at it from the African perspective, and for me, the first analogy that comes to my mind is that when we go through bereavement, what happens? The immediate family sit on the mattress because they need to be quiet, they need to breathe, they need to take in what's happening, and they need to rest. And
Right.
so when it comes to breath work, it's about resting. It's about listening to where your body is. It's about taking your time. And even if
Yeah.
you look at African storytelling and how the West have even changed the perception of why things take their own time in terms of an African perspective. You look at the analogy of Hakuna Matata, it's going to take some time. You look at the East African Swahili term, pole pole, slowly, slowly, is that we become so accustomed to fast, this instant pace and moving, 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 that we often overstep ourselves. Excuse me. So for me about that breath is that yes, the rest of the world might not understand my pace, but my body needs to understand me. I need to understand my body. I need to understand my pace. It's not for the next person. It's not for validation for the next person, because when I stop breathing, life is going to continue. And so it's about being intentional in that space and honoring the earth, but then also honoring our ancestors. Because if you're breathing too quickly and you're not listening, how are the messages from your ancestors supposed to come? How are you supposed to be guided? So that is where the connection comes through for me.
I'm just okay. Well, I didn't know that we're doing this for you to confront me. Thanks. Because I feel so confronted. Because as you're speaking, I'm thinking, it's the hustle, it's the go get 'em, it's the do this, do that, it's the, I've got a to-do list that I need to get done by the end of this day. No matter what my body is telling me, no matter, even when I wake up in the morning, I'm waking up to journal or to do the breath work in aid of something else, and never really to be where I am in that moment. And if my body's just like, let's sleep, I'm just like, we gotta go. We don't have time for this. And I'm wondering, as you say, how are we supposed to be guided? I'm wondering the impact that has on our dreams and our ability to be able to hear that guidance. And I'm just curious as well, as you hold on to the thinking around the dream work, whether some of the work that you began to do was leaning on the book that you had written as well, of just finding your identity, finding who you are, and really standing on it.
I think with the book. So I mean, the book took a long time for me to write, and I needed to write the book because I needed to go through that journey for myself. And in fact, I'm
Yes.
still learning from that journey. So I definitely think that was the starting point. It was the foundation for me reclaiming so much,
Yes.
and particularly for me accepting where I come from. So
Yeah.
for those who haven't read, it's that moment where actually the name of the book came, and it's called Reclaiming the Soil, where I'd gone back to my ancestral home in Pogeng, Rustenburg, and I was walking outside the one day, and a lot has been happening in my life, and I picked up a bit of soil, and a couple of strands trickled through my fingers, and whatever remained, and there was a little bit that remained in my palm of my hand. And I made a promise to myself that I can't reclaim what I'd lost, my identity, my tradition, my culture, my upbringing, all of that. Those are that represented the sand that trickled through my fingers. But what is
Yeah.
in my palm, what I have now, I will nurture. and I will nurture with forgiveness. I will nurture with intention. I will nurture with ignorance even. And so that then led also, without me realizing it at the time, but that also just then me led to me actually identifying where is my body fitting into the different spaces that I am in, whether it was in the entertainment industry, whether it was as a manager, as a daughter, as a friend, as a counselor, as all of these different labels and different things that I so bravely carry and I love carrying. But I also just need to be intentional about how does that fit into me going back to the soil, and how does fit into me in terms of what I need to achieve, without being swayed about what society says and what the world says about what a woman in her late 40s is supposed to do, or be, or act, and breathe, and carry herself.
It's a so what I'm hearing is a type of listening, right? It's almost like going back to a place where you can listen and opening the avenues to listen to yourself. And you said something which I find interesting, that you can also ignore, or a level of ignorance. And I'm just wondering what you mean by ignorance as well in the journey.
So there's ignorance, and it's so weird that this is coming up because I was writing a lot about ignorance the last couple of days, and I think I'm going to do a bit of
Yes.
a blog on it, because whether it is patriarchy, whether it is societal norms, whatever how you've been brought up, there's certain aspects that have just been indoctrinated into us, and we just believe and we just follow through. And one of my biggest eye openers of where I'd lived my life for so long in an ignorant state is the Palestine and Israeli conflict. And even conflict is the wrong word. I should just use the apartheid that is happening in Palestine. And a lot of the time I blamed, well, I was brought up in a white Jewish home, so I have to support the Israeli state, not even really going into and learning about it. Until one day I was called out online. And I was called out by somebody who I have a lot of respect for. And she said to me in a very, very, humble way, she says, you follow so many aspects of human rights, yet you are openly supporting these oppressors. And I obviously put up a big front, and I was like, oh, da, 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 da. And then I was like, sat back, and I was like, wait a minute. What do you actually know? What have you been taught? And this was also in the middle of when I was writing my memoirs and realizing, oh shit, excuse my language, but yeah.
Oh, you're welcome.
So
Most welcome. Yeah.
I've been so ignorant in terms of what has been happening, and that this isn't just a war between two countries. In terms of what has been happening to the people of Palestine, to the people of Gaza, and how I've been indoctrinated. Because also as a young child, how we've been indoctrinated under the apartheid system, where for many years I hated being this little child in a black skin. So that level of ignorance, I had to face it, and I did my homework. And there's still so much more that I need to learn about that. But then coming forward and actually apologizing to the person, because apologizing to the person who called me out, because I automatically reacted in a defensive way. So I apologize for that reaction. But then I also thanked her for opening up my ignorance. And so going back to these areas and with the aspect of gender-based violence, with the aspect of transphobia and homophobia, we need to do a lot of this unlearning. We need to do a lot of the unraveling of the ignorance, because it's been ingrained in us. It's been in our books. It's what we've seen on TV. It's what we hear on the radio. The music, certain music that we could be exposed to. So admitting that it doesn't matter how educated you are, we are still fed a certain amount of ignorance, and it's for us to step in and think, okay, which ignorance filters do I need to let go of? Where do I need to put that mirror up and break down that level of ignorance? And it's not easy.
I imagine so. I mean, when I think about what you're saying now, a lot of of the ignorance is so closely linked to who we think we are or who we imagine ourselves to be. and the anxiety attached to the release of that, because it's part of who we think we are, and who are we when we don't think these things, because we're part of communities. So when we then let go, who do we then become? And I'm just curious about then, how do you support yourself as you detach from these ideas, and you learn, not only just for knowing, but also for your own activism, really stepping squarely into the understanding that this is a human rights issue, and you've had to kind of remove your identity and your previously learned things about this specific thing. How do you deal with the anxiety? How do you support your learning that the discomfort can live here?
Um, that's a very loaded question because every circumstance is different, you know. So,
Yeah.
so in certain aspects, for me, it's about being on your own. It's about listening to your thoughts and not necessarily sitting in your own house and being on your own. It's the intentional things that you put into your journal, or the prayers that you're making, or certain things that you question. And then it's looking a little bit further about, okay, what were the influences that allowed me to operate in an ignorant way? Why was it this person who I have a lot of respect for and who I don't see on a day-to-day basis have to call me out? Where were the other people around me? And then when I came forward, people were like, yeah, you know, we agree, and we were a bit worried about you. I was like, but why didn't you say anything? And so that is also in terms of my shift, and people call it, you know, suddenly everyone's become woke and everything. But it's about us holding each other accountable. So I didn't lash out to certain people and saying, well, why don't you call me out? Da, 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 da. Is that why did you think you couldn't? What have I what have I what am I sharing out there that you think that we can't have this conversation? So it's about figuring out a way of to change how people approach you. And the thing is, I've always seen myself as an approachable person because I've done my counseling and all of that. But at the same time, people were too scared to call me out on such an important issue. And so it's about that. And then it's also looking into, okay, well, what am I reading? What is feeding my brain? What isn't feeding my brain? Where do I need to tap into that? And then the most important thing, which also helped me through my journey with, and still helping me, and I think will help me until I die, is the aspect of forgiving myself. You know, it's very difficult to forgive the next person, but when you sit down yourself and you're like, okay, kid, today's okay. It's okay. It's okay. You're going to be all right. Don't worry about that. Yes, you messed up, but you've acknowledged that. And so that it's a lot of reflection. Um, it's also a lot of prayer. You know, my spiritual journey has also taken a total different shift. And I think I needed to write the book. I needed to go through that process, and understand that for me, I've always felt that I've needed and believed and still believe that I've needed a higher force to guide me. And so even when I went through my when I'm a guide, when I converted to Judaism, and even the name I chose was Raziella, which is God is my secret. I needed to go through that journey, and I was a practicing Jew, very, very staunch for many, many years. But then my guides were like, okay, but now you need to also understand where you come from, and had to show me the racism in that synagogue, and that's why I left the synagogue. But then also then found my root in terms of my African spirituality. You know, so going into that space, and looking at ignorance there. So the indoctrination that I received about African spirituality from an early age, I was petrified. And now that I've
Of course
embraced
you were.
it,
Most of us still are, because it's almost like the great unknown. And I suppose the apartheid project really worked well in mystifying and also legislating that level of mysticism, that is terrible mysticism, by the way, into the African spirituality. And when I'm thinking about it now, as you're speaking about it, it's Judaism, African spirituality. I'm also thinking about, how do you one may be wondering, how do you have feminism, African spiritualism, and the learnings that you've had for Judaism? Because it just also activism, because it just seems like everything is so worlds apart. How do you bring these things together, and then also speak about healing?
So understand that in terms of the conversion that I did in Judaism, it was through the Reform synagogue. So it wasn't the
Yes.
Orthodox. So a lot of people think that with Judaism, it's just the Hasidic Jews or the Orthodox Jews, which you see them in the black attire, the tefillin, the black hats, the women are covered up. So that is one very, very old rule. But then there's also the Reform and the Conservative. So
Yes.
when you look at the oldest and the most historic Jews on earth, they actually originated in East Africa. But because of society, because of politics and everything is transcended and faced on Israel. So in my journey, and that's why I believe that everything that you do is for a reason, nothing is coincidence, is that I connected with the Abba Yudaya community, which is the oldest community in Uganda. And I did that, ironically, when I was working for a Jewish radio station called Chai FM. And I remember meeting the rabbi and told me about their journey on how Israel in certain areas didn't believe that they were real Jews, and how they said, well, they needed to convert in a certain way. And these African Jews were like, but we've been living like this for centuries. Why do we have to go to a white country to convert to a religion that belongs to us? And it intrigued me. And then I had the wonderful opportunity of going, because I've visited Uganda many, many times. And then one trip I went and I spent some time with them. I spent a good couple of weeks with them, celebrated the Jewish New Year, all of that. And so going back to your question, so understanding with the Abba Yudaya, with the Reform Judaism, is that there's equality within the synagogue. So in the Orthodox synagogue, men and women sit separately. There's a hierarchy, whereas in the Reform, everybody's together. And one of the reasons why I joined the specific synagogue was there was a female rabbi, and that was the first time that I've ever experienced it. So there, in terms of the feminism, in terms of the equality, comes through. And then one of the most beautiful revelations that came through and that are still coming through in my African spirituality journey is the power of the matriarch, the power of the matriarchal spirits that protect us, the warriors. Why is Earth called Mother Earth? Hello, because we are a lot more superior. You look at history, you look at our African feminist icons, it is the women who have been leading. But society, colonialism has shifted our view, has changed our view. This is why women were given the womb. This is why we give life. This is why we are a lot more superior in certain areas, because we are much more connected and a lot more spiritually inclined. So all three are slightly entwined. And if you look at, particularly when it comes to colonialism, on the laws that were enforced onto women, and even the dress code. So I find it so funny when the patriarchs talk about, well, women are supposed to only wear dresses at certain functions and what. But if you go back in time, men were wearing those dresses. So why are they not wearing them now? So all of that, and it's taken a long time for me to find this and find roots and find connections, not roots. But as we know, some of it is a lot more connected than what we know, and some is a little bit more separated. But that's also okay, because then that also opens up the conversation for challenges. It opens up the conversation for checking in with yourself and for learning more.
As you're speaking, I'm remembering a friend of mine was telling me, when we're talking about feminism and African spirituality and colonialism, and they were saying, generally in the Xhosa and Zulu cultures, when somebody passes away, then after a year of them passing, they slaughter. There's a cow that gets slaughtered, and it's called Buiswa, right? And then she was saying to me, speaking to the power of women, she was saying, why do you think that women don't get a cow after they pass away. And I was so completely intrigued. It's like, because women are so powerful, they consistently are straddling the line between life and death. And so there's no need to buyisa, because this person has been doing that throughout time. And I find it so curious as you speaking now to say, um, this idea that people who are women can be held and terrorized and consistently have to figure out the way for themselves. And beginning of this conversation, you were speaking about resilience, and I'm just curious about that. When there's so much power that is in this body, and obviously systems also know that there's power, and that's why they put these things in place to disempower. um, what is the work that you're doing, particularly when it comes to gendered work? What are some of the pieces of work that you're doing to almost reintroduce us to ourselves and to our power and to who exactly we are?
Such a beautiful, beautiful question. And I always, like, there's certain interviews and certain people that I've declined because of the intention of where, like, the conversation's going to go.
Yeah.
And one question that I always hate is that people say, "Can you empower somebody?" And where did you find your power as a woman? And for a long time, it just irritated me. And now I'd rather use it as an educational tool. Is that we've always had the power. But it's just
Yes.
society and everything else that told us that we don't, and so we're fighting for that. And so while we're fighting for that, life is carrying on, and they are rising and rising and rising. But we're still fighting for that power. But we've got the power, and so if you step into the arena and you know you've got the power, they will continue fighting, but you're still going to keep on your journey. You're still going to keep on what you're going to do. Yes, you're going to be bashed down. Yes, it's not going to be easy. That is when the breathing steps in. That is when the reflection steps in to say, oh, okay, step back. I also have the power to relax. I also have the power to not engage in that or not engage with that person. I have the power to breathe and check on me. So that is the most important thing. And it's ironic that I did my first feminist political education through an organization called Power. And I mean, I sat with the organization for nearly 19 years, volunteer work, board work, all sorts of other things. But it's all about that level of empowerment and understand, and what power means to you is very different than what power means to me. It's very different to what power meant to Rosie 10 years ago. You know, and so for me it's about power over my body, because stepping to a different phase, and the phase between 47 till about 50, and I'm now embracing the perimenopause that's going to come. But for a long time I feared stepping into that space of being 50, because I believed of what a powerful 50-year-old woman is supposed to look like, and I'm like, this isn't the thing that I put on in my vision board when I was 14. But
Yeah.
and then now I look back and I'm like, but there's so many other areas that I've worked in, so many other areas that I have empowered myself, that I have been powerful. And so it's about going back into the gendered work, going back into the work in terms with working with LGBTQI plus communities, my healing work. It's about taking power and control over you first. The old adage which we always use when you get on a plane, they say to you, God forbid, there's a lapse in oxygen. When the masks come down, what do? Put the oxygen on you first. As
First.
women, we have been taught, ingrained, made to believe that we need to put the oxygen on everybody else first. And then you dare to even ask for more oxygen because you haven't had any at all. It's about shifting that mind and changing that.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, okay. I'm gonna take a beat. I'm taking a bit because there's a certain level of grief that I feel about giving yourself oxygen first. And I think as a first born daughter, as a mom, as a friend, actually even as a daughter, being able to observe sort of that self-sacrificing way of being and
Mm,
trying to imagine differently for yourself, and trying to be in the world differently because, when you're parenting or in community with other people, there's a certain level of emulation that you do that supports other people to believe that, they can do that thing too, whether they're children or not. And
mm,
just when I'm thinking about what you're saying now about fundamentally one of the biggest ways we can begin to heal ourselves and is to learn firstly to breathe but also to take care of ourselves first. And
mm,
it's so far removed from what we learn from religion. It's so far removed from what we learn from our parents, from what we learn from school, what is taught
mm,
outside. We if you're a woman or a feminine presenting person, you must be selfless. You must give of yourself consistently. And
mm,
I think I keep going to this idea of, to your healing work around this because my curiosity is not letting me leave it because it's a question around when, well, when you started Letsatsi, what were the big things that you wanted to move? What were the things? Because for myself, I'm churning as we speak because when you spoke about give yourself the oxygen first, I had to be like, oh, ooh, oh, the responsibility of breathing. Oh my goodness. And so in the grains of creating that healing space in the form of Letsatsi, what were the things that you at the foundations were holding or wanted to hold for us?
mm. So many things. The one is that acknowledging the pain. And so, 5 years prior was my last TV acting gig where I refused to take off my clothing and I called out sexual harassment on set. And I knew that the choices that I made were going to have repercussions on my career. But also, I knew, and it was as much as I'd been taught it and we've seen it before, it's still difficult to accept that there's going to be levels of intimidation, there's going to be a lot of patronizing, undermining. And one of the questions that I asked the producers was that they had approached me for this job. I'd taken a hiatus from acting for a couple of years to focus on business, focus on producing. They approached me to come back. And I said, you approach me knowing the feminist work that I do, yet you're
Yeah.
trying to enforce these anti-feminist policies and everything on me. And then the undermining came back and saying, well, you didn't tell us that you wouldn't go nude. And I was like, I didn't have to tell you because the contract that you gave me stated that I didn't have to be nude, and it's a family show. So it's accepting that, and then when I'd resigned and I'd left, and the production manager told, because there was a whole thing that happened with the broadcasters, that they lied to the broadcasters and so forth, and so the broadcasters cancelled the show. And so when the
Yeah.
show was cancelled, somebody had taken a recording of the final meeting, and the production manager who had called the whole cast and whole crew and said, the show has been cancelled, you can thank Rosie Motene for losing her jobs. And I was like, wow. And that was a big, big blow to me. But because of the resilience, I kept on pushing, pushing, pushing. Until one
Yeah.
day, my doctor said to me, she said, you've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia because you're not listening to the trauma that your body's been through. And there were also other past traumas, which I won't get into now. But this is what's
Yeah.
manifesting now. Um, and so leading into the Letsatsi was that as much as I was able to move on and I had other areas where I could work on and pass and move through the trauma, I hadn't dealt with it on a psychosocial and holistic level. And so with the
Mm.
Letsatsi, I wanted to provide different forms of counseling and healing, but then also a way of how do we continue? How do we feed ourselves? How do we be able to equip ourselves so that we don't have to go back to that abusive or traumatic environment? When I'd spoken out against this TV production house, which, by the way, a year later they got a new production team in, a new executive producer, and I know that now it's one of the safest production spaces in the industry. But one of the things that the actresses that came to me and said, listen, we know exactly which producer said this and this and this. It was verbatim. of how this one producer tried to undermine black actors and actresses. And they were like, but we don't have a choice. We needed to go back and just do it. And so for me, one of my holistic approaches for Letsatsi is that to provide the healing and to provide the healing as much as possible, because remember, that's also linear. But then also look for the low-hanging fruits so that you don't have to go back to those horrible places, that you don't have to tolerate that you can also believe in your power. They need you on that set because of your talent. Yes, they always say, yes, anybody's replaceable. Nobody's ever replaceable. You can find somebody that could possibly replicate that person, but not to the same extent. So believe in your power. So with Letsatsi, it's about that. And over the years, it's been seeking different forms of healing, different forms. What does healing look like to the next person? A lot of people, the counseling route isn't something that they want or need, but maybe just, and a lot of the time, my counseling is just listening. Because also we haven't been given a platform just to listen without judgment. So that is why with the life coaching, yes, if you want to move to the next level, but then there's also the counseling. But I also have a program which I fuse together, and that is looking at counseling alongside a life coaching program. So if you have gone through trauma, but you also still need to continue, you've got to feed your family, feed yourself, step up into the next level career, whatever it is, you can still do that together. The counseling and therapy will never ever take away the pain, what's happened to you, but it just helps you find coping mechanisms to continue with your life.
Yeah, because as you're saying it, this, which is where we started, this thing where we consistently are in the rat race, and you feel like there's no space for you to kind of take off the load and take off the bra and remove the shoelaces and kind of be free. And I wish it for everybody, quite frankly, for everybody to be able to experience that. And I'm just, when then you speak about counseling, when you speak about coaching, have you also infused other African ways of being that are not necessarily talk, in the ways of being and healing for people who may not necessarily be able to be as expressive as they'd like to be verbally, but still would like the support of a guided healing journey.
Absolutely. So one of the things that have opened me up, especially in my African spirituality journey, is finding, or rather opening the door for guides to guide me. And so whether it is in a physical form or whether it's in a spiritual form. And now because I've trusted my power in that process, it's opened up that area. So particularly with healing, I've always had a strong connection to mountains and a strong connection to water. And now I found my healing qualities and my healing abilities in those specific spaces. So in terms of some of the healing work that I do, and it's very difficult in the city, but I try to base it as outdoors or as natural as possible, because that is also where the connection comes from. So it won't be, some of my clients aren't necessarily sit-down counseling sessions. Some people want that, and that's okay. But also sometimes a healing session can include going to a river and sitting and listening to the guides and guiding them into what the spiritual messages are coming through, or just letting them find the answers. So there's so many things that I've picked up along the journey, and you can only do that once you have an open heart and once you have an open mind, but also once you understand your power in opening that up. So in terms of the even with the coaching, I mean, some of the sessions that I do offer, it's grounding work, sun therapy. Hence why I named my company Letsatsi, is that the sun is so powerful, and it has shifted so many things in my life, and it has the ability to do so much if we don't tap into it. One of the things that saved me during COVID was that I lived in an apartment that had an amazing amount of sun, where I could open the window and actually just feel the rays of the sun. And so it's finding those different aspects of what suits you. One of the lessons that I learned, because it was also coming from a place where I had to tap into my ignorance, was that was it was in a corporate environment, and I said to everyone, please just take off your shoes and let's walk around and feel the earth. And somebody broke down. I mean, I can share this because I have permission to, but the gentleman was like, my association with taking off my shoes goes back to me being brought up in a poverty-stricken environment. So this isn't actually healing for me. So it was another form of reflection, but also not everybody is going to do grounding by walking on the grass or walking on the sand. And it's identifying that and opening and welcoming that. So there's other aspects that I've created for healing for somebody like that. Simple water healing. We don't have the luxury of being close to a lake, but I do have the luxury of having running water where we can pray on it and then use that aspect of it for you. But it's all about also just having an open mind and then also having the power to be discerning. There's sometimes in some spaces that I go into that could have been incredibly lucrative to my career, to my bank account, that I'm like, this energy, no, 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 no,
No,
no,
you're like, we are not hustling anymore. Please, we
situation.
release us from this hustle.
Me, I like to sleep at night. So yeah. So to answer your question, so it's about bringing in that aspect of spirituality healing, and I want to touch on something else because
Yes.
I've had this conversation with a very good friend of mine who's also going this amazing journey, spiritual journey for herself and for her family. And is that, when you go through the African spiritual journey, yes, some people are called to Twasa, some people are called to be on specific routes. Listen to
Yeah.
what you've been called to. So I haven't been called, maybe later on, I haven't been called
Yeah.
along that route, but the messages and the callings that I've gotten are very different. And as much as I'm embracing that, I'm also not scared to share it in the necessary spaces. Because there's been a specific label of what a spiritual healer is supposed to look like. And now I'm looking back and thinking, actually, but it's your connection with God, it's your connection with the ancestors. So who is the next person to tell me that I'm doing it right or wrong? This is going back into like the indoctrination of those structured religions of like, you need to do this, this, and this, and this, and this. So
Exactly.
it's also just about embracing that, and particularly as somebody who has a connection to the feminine. I have a connection to the feminine and masculine spirit and energy, which is perfectly fine. Is that whatever feeds you for a specific day, let it feed you. If it's a masculine energy that's taken on, there's a reason why you need that masculine energy at that season of your life, at that point of your day. Embrace it. If it doesn't have an identity, but it's there, that's also perfectly fine. And you can only do that once you breathe, once you let everything slow down and you listen.
Thanks for calling me out again. I hear you, and I find a great deal of resonance as you say that the qualities of a healer or one, the different aspects of the healing work that we do is not homogeneous. It doesn't look the same, it doesn't feel the same, it doesn't sound the same. And so we do the work of healing, or when we do in fact breathe and we do in fact listen, we can do our bit of healing where we are with the people who need it from us. And it could be in the tiniest of scale and it could be the largest of scale. And I think as you're speaking, for me, that is what being well looks like, especially in community. And the length of a pan-Africanist way of being is exactly that, that we're each other's healers. And if we're not taking the time to listen and do it through water, do it through salt, do it through speaking, do it through prayer, then we are really stealing the opportunity from ourselves and those around us. Something that she said as we're closing out around, they're on this journey for themselves and their families. Because we really think that going on journeys is for the purposes of being a practicing sangoma or a herbalist, whatever. which is valuable, but we forget that sometimes it really is for the immediate people around you, and
Mm.
that you, when you journey, it is for the feeding and for the experience of those people immediately around you.
Mm. And
And it's
also,
this
it's
for
also
me, this
maybe for
conversation
a
alone has
lesson
been such a
to break those generational curses.
yes. And
You
I don't
know.
know, do we know what we mean when we say that? Because sometimes I'm just like, we just be saying stuff. We
Mm.
just be saying stuff. Because we have to journey for us to be able to then begin the work of, and it's being present and breathing. Save me,
Mm.
Jesus. I'm having such a hard time. Like when you said you took the course for a year to learn how to breathe, I'm thick in the middle of it and I'm having such a hard time because in my mind I get it, but in my body I know that I don't. And it's such a little tug, but we do it for ourselves and we do it for our family.
Yeah.
As we close, is there anything else that you want us to know about the healing journey, about ourselves?
Mm.
And also, please do let us know where we can find you, because I
Mm.
think that's most important. After this, we're going to have to find you.
I think it's the most important thing is to check in with you.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time it isn't that easy. And I'm calling out because I've also been toxic in certain spaces. And I'm calling out ourselves as, and I'm gonna marginalize us, so as Black queer folk.
Yeah.
Let's love each other a lot more. Are you a space where you are talking about respect or human rights, yet you don't have an issue of disrespecting a certain other black queer body because you have a certain amount of power over them? So whether it's financial or prestige or what have you. Are you a safe haven, a truly safe haven, or is it dependent on who it is? So if somebody comes and spreads rumors about another black queer person in your space, do they have the luxury of knowing that they can do that in that space, and you're not going to call it out or check up on it? Because ultimately, that energy affects the person that has been brought into that space unwillingly.
Yeah.
One of the things we are so beautiful and so open, and our sexuality is so amazing. Yet, why are we cheating and hurting each other? Because there are many relationships that you can have open relationships, and it's beautiful to do that.
Yes.
But why disrespect the next person? Because if you're not being open about the energies you're bringing in, that for me is another form of abuse. So if somebody
That's
thinks that you're being monogamous, yet you're bringing in other forms of spiritual energies in, you're attacking them. And let alone the physical aspect of everybody knowing that you've been cheated on and all of that, because that also has a mental effect, right? That's another
the
form of
betrayal of it
emotional
all.
abuse. So it's all of these things. Is that what conversations are you having with each other? How are we holding ourselves accountable? Are we a truly safe space for people to come to, or is it just depending on who the person is? Are we withholding financial gains because of specific power? It's all of these different things that come to play. Within the toxicity that we've learned, and it's understandable, we've learned it from the patriarchy, we've learned it from apartheid, but it's about being intentional about stopping it in our spaces. We can't do it in big organizations, but it's about the small WhatsApp groups, it's about the small circles, and that for me, I've been very, very intentional now of who my close space is, because I need to know that 100% we can't always be there all the time because life happens. But I know at some point, or spiritually, I've got this person and they have got me. And so
Yeah.
that is, and it can be very lonely because not everybody's thinking that, because we automatically just fall into the gossip, automatically just fall into listening, and so it's about that being intentional with yourself. And so to get hold of me, I'm on I'm on every platform, Instagram, I'm on Twitter, not so much because at the moment the energy is very, very negative, and so it's very, very toxic. And so I'm listening to my intentions, so I'm there, but I would definitely say more Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn under Rosie Motene, but I'd also, post a lot of the stuff that I do for Letsatsi. So whether it is counseling, whether it is life coaching, if I have the capacity, my counseling also incorporates giving advice if you need to open up a court order or a protection order against somebody. If I have capacity to do court preparation with you, going to the courthouse, if you're going through a trial, or just preparing for what's expected. We do retreats as well. I'm actually going to be hosting a retreat. I don't know when this is going to go out, but it's going out on the 2nd of May, which is a breathwork
Oh, it's
reflective.
definitely before that.
Okay, great. So a reflective practice retreat, which over the last year I did a reflective practice course, which is going towards my postgrad degree, and so now I've incorporated that into my practice. So it's reflective talking practice, but as well reflective writing, because that's also very close to some of my healing things. Of people just think that if you're going to be writing, you need to be a well-known author. Actually, putting things on paper is a great way not only to manifest, but it's also a great way to release. And so the retreat that I'm holding is in this beautiful venue where we're also going to be incorporating a lot of groundwork. We're going to do some sun therapy. If it's raining, then we'll do rain therapy. And of course, we're going to start off and end off with different types of breath work. So look at my social medias for that. The offering is 400, but if people cannot make that, let's talk. Because it's about energy passing. So I'd rather somebody, whether we pay off or there's a discount, we can work that out. But I don't want people to miss out purely because you think that it isn't for you. If you feel that there's a calling for it, let's have that conversation. And I think that's also very important for healers and for coaches, is that yes, be set your standards with corporate, set your standards with certain people, but also be open to the conversation of understanding if people can meet you halfway. Obviously, which I've also learned, there are some charlatans who are like, no, it's fine, I'll pay you, and then actually meantime they're driving like an X5 and they've got a huge mansion, but they refuse to pay their bills. We learn as we go along. But
Wherever there's a gap, there will always be someone who's trying to get in there. Or you can also look for Rosie's retreats on our social media pages. We'll make sure that we get that content so that you guys don't miss out on it. It has been such a pleasure, and thank you so much for saying yes to this here moment. I have been shaken and stirred. Um, and if you guys enjoyed this conversation, please feel free to share with your people. Follow us on social media, Eve's Apple the Mag, and also remember to follow Rosie Motene on her social media platforms so that you don't miss out on breathing. We must just breathe equally in this whole And it's a wrap. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Rosie, I'm going to ask you to stay on. Please don't leave because it's still uploading. But that was
okay,
so
cool.
good. Thank you so much. Even though you have confronted me. Yeah. Oh, wow.
Nice.
Thanks. That was rough because I'm just like, but that was important. I guess this one was for me. That was really, really important. Just because there's so much else going on in terms of journey, resisting, and kind of finding a way of stepping into stuff meaningfully. So I guess this
Yeah.
was not just for the podcast, it was for me too. So thank you.
But that's the beauty about just different interactions, is that we never know what we're going to get out,
Yeah.
and be open to that. And if you don't, it's also okay.
Yeah.